sort of quite recently that I've been able to watch grand designs without breaking out into a cold sweat, because it was quite a terrifying experience. You know, it's one thing to sort of be an architect in your day job and work on other people's projects, but actually do your own thing, and suffer from terrible, what would you say, perfectionism, which sort of translates into never being able to let things go, and labouring over details way too much. To be out the other end of it was good. It didn't quite take 10 years, but put it this way, before my first child was born, we moved out of the house that is where this house is now. And I thought, yeah, we'll probably be back in, you know, soon enough. She started school and we still weren't living back there. So I think she might have been year 1 actually. But anyway, doesn't matter. I tried to sort of think about this a different way because I sort of feel like I've been talking about this house a lot, and I kind of get sick of the sound of my own voice, which is kind of just, I don't know, seems very cruel today because I'd love my voice to sound normal. Anyway, so like I try to sort of actually think about it in terms of building rather than just with my architect hat on. So I haven't sort of gone into a lot of detail on some of the sort of design concepts, but I'll talk about sort of, you know, as an architect and trying to sort of build it. I didn't actually build it myself. I had went through a sort of traditional contract, but was sort of heavily involved in the process while I was going through, obviously. So first of all, my partner is she works in the environment field, so it was kind of worked well that we're obviously going to have very similar wants in the outcomes with our design, and her brother lives in the other house, which you can sort of see a little bit of on the other side there. So we've actually subdivided this block, so I sort of feel in some ways we're actually increasing the density, which is a good thing as well, given Adelaide's is so low density in terms of world cities. So the main thing of driving the design was trying to achieve maximum reduction in on-site energy and water consumption. That's it in a nutshell. Mains water reticulation itself actually uses a lot of energy use off-site, and minimising stormwater pollution in creeks through the Torrens and then obviously out in the Gulf. So we've captured pretty much everything we can on this place. As well as the reduction in terms of the actual water and energy use on site, we tried to reduce the off-site impact that in terms of embodied energy, which is the amount of energy it requires to build or create your materials as well as erect your building. And on top of that, also a reduction of toxicity of materials being manufactured, so using stainless steel rather than chrome fittings where possible, because chrome's quite nasty in terms of its manufacture. Minimising materials also. So these although they're quite sort of architectural looking houses in a lot of respects, they've actually got quite modest sized rooms in a lot of them, and that was sort of partly a result of minimising materials so that there's less energy that's required to build the buildings, but also from a little bit of a the new buzzword is social, or the buzz term is social sustainability, where we're trying to sort of encourage our children not to sort of want to lock themselves away in their bedrooms and actually spend more time in the living spaces, and that we've only got one sort of main living area. We don't have sort of separate sort of formal living space and another one for the kids and the home cinema room and things like that. Can close things off with little concertina door, but that's just being a little bit more clever. We also wanted to limit the use of steel, both for reduction in the energy that's required, and steel's also quite expensive, and there's obviously issues with mining. And I wanted to test out a lot of the theories that I'd read about so much before, but never been actually able to sort of put in a job that I'd worked on. And then obviously I went through and reviewed a whole lot of different active systems, and sort of rejected several as well that I didn't think were appropriate in this particular context. So the existing house was not really anything worth salvaging. There was asbestos in it. It's an interwar house, really a big part of the proverbial crap, as it were. It's kind of the worst house in a nice street, so it was good in that respect. And we had quite stringent council development plan conditions to negotiate, meaning that if we wanted to build our two houses with a party wall, it was going to be classified as Category 3 non-complying, which meant if we got rejected, we didn't have any rights of appeal and we'd have to go back to the drawing board to start again. It's very silly. The planners couldn't work out why it was, but they were very much on our side. And based on the sort of things we were talking about wanting to do, he sort of convinced us to keep going down that path. And hopefully the actual panel of elected councillors would be okay with it, which they all were, except for one, and I kind of just laugh at him now. Anyway, so we were just outside a heritage conservation zone as well, so we didn't have to worry about that, thankfully. And yeah, so that basically meant I could do what I want in terms of, not having to make it look like an old house or anything. So, as I said, I wanted to use a party wall rather than having two separate concrete slabs and two external walls abutting just for material reasons. And also, I wanted less chance of it being knocked down in future, like sort of theoretically have a longer lifespan and therefore a longer life cycle assessment, LCA. I'm just forgetting things at the moment. So anyway, I wanted to make it look like a house. So I kind of chose a little bit of a monopoly motif and thought, they can't actually argue with that. That's a house, isn't it? Or it's actually a hotel, but I think it sort of makes it look better. You know what I mean? I couldn't find any pictures of the green ones on Google quickly enough. So yeah, despite a strong interest in environmentally responsive architecture and knowledge of these theories behind a lot of these principles, as I said, I hadn't really had much chance to test out a lot of these things and these technologies. So, I'm trying to do this with one hand. I basically went back to first principles and began to review everything that I could within a sort of short space of time, looking at all sort of old product manuals, ads in journals and magazines and various resources like the BDP Environment Design Guide, which is something that architects and builders have put out together. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, there's always a balance of trying to work out which criteria suits you or is more important to you, and you always got to balance that. Sometimes these goals conflict, to do with just general, what would you say? Sometimes environmental conflicts, like something you might have that is low VOC might actually have high energy or something, just out of interest. So you've got to pick what's important to you. So yeah, in this case, we're obviously designing to achieve the highest environmental performance, trying to balance that with the actual materials being employed being fit for purpose. That's a very important thing. So even though aluminium windows might have a lot more embodied energy than timber ones, using them in the right context is going to be much more sensible option. It's not always just choose the lowest or whatever. And also keeping control of costs and affordability issues. And in this case, because of the area that these were in, we had to be careful of not risk undercapitalising the site, because then it is sort of viewed as potentially a redevelopment option. So, first world problems, hey? Oops, I'm back. Yeah, so the builder I selected for, builders I looked at for tendering on this project, were those that I either worked with before or appreciated their standard workmanship and knew they were in the sort of league that I could, aim towards. As it was the builder I ended up going with, he was a new outfit, sort of like myself, and very eager. I'd known him as a project manager for an upper-end developer client I'd sort of worked with in previous employment. He sort of was fairly confident that he sort of knew the level of standard of finish. I'd sort of seen some of his recent projects and was happy to sort of go down that path. So in this case, documentation that I put out was critical to get this right for the builder. I had it in the back of my mind that I want him to not have too many scary patches in the drawings for him that he'll then load with contingencies and pump the price up. yeah, and it was basically the drawings themselves are focused around maximising the use of domestic building trades, not so much commercial. As I said, a highly resolved level of detailing, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because if I see too many drawings, they sort of run a mile. But I wanted to leave few holes in what for them to sort of not have to panic about. And then various things that need to be dealt with later. We just had some notes to review them later. So it was very relaxed attitude to the contract. Now the aim to use mostly domestic trades is for reasons of cost, through simplicity and hopefully some sort of sharing of knowledge with the builder and trades that some of these greener concepts aren't inherently more difficult or expensive in themselves. Right, so relating to materials and technologies, the sustainable design industry is constantly, it's seen some constant and often at times rapid rate of evolution and improvement, arguably at a quicker rate than what's happening in sort of just standard building and architecture sort of material areas. It can actually sort of feel like a bit of a job sometimes, just trying to keep up with all these developments. There was always going to, in this particular case, I always felt there was the need to specify precise products, often with a particular supplier listed, and even quite often a sum, like actual cost, a PC sum added to it, to prevent the tenders being loaded or avoid substitution of products with inferior environmental performance. Like, say, it could be a brand of polyester insulation that had a much lower recycled content than the one we wanted. You can sort of see the polyester stuff on the left there. Just as a little note, I'll never use polyester again because the trades hate it. They can't cut it very easily. Normally they can just use a knife with glass wool. With polyester, it ruins all their knives and drills. There's several drill bits lost in my house that it winds up the polyester, and the only way I could get it off my drill is I just had to say goodbye to the drill bit and sort of punch it inside the house. So there's all these, lucky they're not going to sort of, I guess it's going to look like someone's knee reconstruction if it was ever x-rayed. Excuse me a sec. And so, given there were so many things new to me here, there were the complexities of using unfamiliar technologies to deal with as well. And sometimes this was because some things were completely brand new on the market, like literally only sort of within sort of months of it being available, or sometimes just because I'd never used it before. And with all of this and the constant changing, improving information, there were lots of times I actually just had to draw a line, bite the bullet, and specify it, and just hope for the best, because you can't keep sort of waiting around for things to progress. Like I was in a commercial building arrangement, so I can't sort of cause delays, or else I have to pay for them. So we had to work out how to adapt to various changes made along the way as well, as anyone will in this sort of situation. I put this one up here because they'd done all the benching work and ready for the footings, which are quite deep footings, unfortunately, because of the very reactive clay soil in that area. Here, we chose at the last minute to go for underfloor heating, and that affected the slide of the habs. Yeah, so see the underfloor heating going in there, and you will notice, as Terry mentioned before, that little area out the back there is the only area that we use reverse block veneer, because it's really not very useful to use in the non-passive parts of your house, like in the sort of south-facing areas. So we had situations where one of the trades wasn't actually thinking what he was doing when he put certain bits in. So this little window shade here was actually meant to be in line with that. And instead of me taking that out, getting that whole thing rejected, I just told him to move that there, and then, so there was things that were a couple of dummy bolts, so it just looks like a kind of clever joint, because I was very much not, trying to sort of minimise stuff going to waste unnecessarily. And some architects would probably be really anally retentive and say, no, that's got to go, you've got to replace it, it's your problem. But yeah, that's just one little thing there that I actually had sort of supporting photograph of. Other times, unfortunately, it had to be redone. Now through here, we've got a situation where I was testing out a little the theory that I'd sort of read about, where I was taking cool air from in the cellar and piping it through this the slab and then up through the back of the kitchen to help just provide very gentle airflow to the back of the fridge and help the sort of the heat dissipation. The fridge is basically your biggest energy using appliance in your house generally, I think, unless it's unless you've got reverse cycle air conditioning or whatever. But yeah, so any if you can make any sort of impact on that, it's going to help. So we had it all detailed for these pipes to run through here, and for some reason they installed them like this. So that was one thing I had to say, no guys, seriously, you've got to do it properly. You can't have these pipes with too many zigzags in it, because you get extra resistance on the air movement, and it kind of defeats the purpose. So they did it on both sides. Don't ask me how, but they seem to miss those little cues there. Anyway. Now, LED lighting was something I've been watching for years, just waiting for it to get to the point where it's actually usable. Now, for so long it was really crappy, and then later on it was just really too expensive, and just at the time we're getting ready to sort of install it, was all coming down so much in price that, I mean, it's not actually an LED light, it just looks like kind of our fitting. But yeah, we could use 8 watt LED fitting instead of 50 watts like other people have in their halogens, or 15 watts or whatever with the compact fluoros. And the good quality LEDs last about 50,000 hours, which some people say is actually longer than a lot of houses will actually be standing up with the lights on. So there's lots of light bulbs I never have to change. I really like low maintenance. Unfortunately, at the time, it was a little bit hard to sort of see samples in the flesh, so it sort of required me sort of a few trips backwards and forwards to the shops to change them, and sending entire orders back when I realised it was I'd got the wrong size. And I got some really bad advice from a supplier of evaporative cooling. I wanted to use evaporative air conditioning in the house. I'd considered not using it at one point, but then we had one of those heat waves where it was like 5 days, where it was about 44 or something like that, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to do that. Evaporative was okay because it only uses about 10 to 15% as much electricity as reverse cycle, and it's perfectly suitable to Adelaide's climate for all but about 2 or 3 days a year. So we had a lot of ceiling fans as well. But anyway, I got some bad advice. The provisions I'd made for the ducting were looking like it wasn't going to be enough, and the position where I wanted the unit itself wasn't going to be the space. So it was a lot of hot, sweaty nights trying to work out how to deal with this. And I'm saying hot because it was actually in the middle of a heat wave, so it was really hammering at home. And we managed to find, with another contractor, that was actually quite helpful, a system that would fit where I wanted it to. So there's just some of the massive ducts. The ducts in evaporative are much bigger. We had new DC fans. Instead of alternate current, they're direct current, and they use about half as much electricity as normal fans. They came out while we're building, so I just changed all those, and that was great. So yeah, they use a whopping 31 watts instead of 60 or something, or 65. Yeah, grey water. That was a bit of a drama. I'd never used that before, and unfortunately a lot of the people installing it didn't really know what the hell was going on either, and we only found that out after some of the paving had gone down, and to be told that we might have to pull up some of the paving to put extra power lines was not really filling me with a lot of confidence, especially because the paving, we were managing that contract ourselves to kind of save on the builder's margin. Yeah, because electrical cable's got to be 600 millimetres deep under the ground for safety reasons. So I wasn't really happy about the idea of digging all that up, having to recompact and then put the stuff down again. Anyway, we got through it. It was again, just one of those little things that we managed to work our way around with the stuff that was in at the time. Solar PV, we put as much as we felt that we could put on at the time, given the price of PVs plummeted, and knowing full well that we were going to be providing more electricity than we're actually using. We could obviously feed that back into the grid and sort of consider that as an offset against the energy that's gone into the building, so that eventually, theoretically, the building will be carbon neutral. It actually provides 200% more than what we use, so we get checks every quarter. I haven't had to pay for electricity once. Yeah, I mean, usually in summer we get sort of 2 checks, sort of around that period, about $500. So it's actually nice. Yeah, we worked out the PV cells are going to pay for themselves in about 4 years, so that's pretty good. Anyway, there's a lot of people selling them now because of this plummeted cost, and they're often sold in advertisements by price per system size. Now, obviously, that sort of doesn't really take into account that there are varying quality differences in panels and particularly inverters and some of the other components in there. And, potentially even warranty lengths. And I will say the country of manufacture is not necessarily an indication of the quality. Like, just because it's made in China doesn't mean it's cheap or crappy, because quite often a lot of the companies have just built their factories there, but they're actually German or Australian, and a lot of the Chinese ones are really good as well. They're actually world leaders in producing that stuff. We went with a supplier who'd been around a long time, and my partner actually worked in another business of his that was for an ecologically, it's called Eco News, I think. Yeah, it's a newspaper. Anyway, so I was filled with more confidence. They basically regularly updated the brands and products they supplied based on current information, had a great deal of knowledge about the design of installations, including the effects of roof angles, the orientation, heat dissipation, and potential shading risks. Because if all you need is like one of those panels to be shaded sort of mostly, and it'll cut the whole system out and just completely stops working. So, when I say orientation as well, the site here is actually our backyard faces northwest. So from an orientation point of view, it's actually really difficult because you want to be able to look out of your backyard, but facing northwest is where you get the sort of bastard hot sun in summertime. So anyway, so that's actually facing northeast a little bit, but even that was only affecting the total output by less than 5% from 100. Given we'd subdivided, we had sort of few issues to do with site. We didn't quite have a lovely whole acre. We had 1/8 of an acre each by this stage. We were limited to what size tanks we could put in simply because of the depth. You had to be sort of 45 degrees away from the edge of the slab. There's this thing called the angle of repose, which is an engineering issue. Anyway, we still managed to get two, for each house, managed to get a 13,500 litre rainwater tank. It basically means we don't use any water throughout winter, and whenever it rains, the whole house uses it, and that's plumbed to every single roof space on the property, including the garage out the back, because we've got rear lane access. What's it got here? We couldn't actually get away with using a black water treatment system here because there just wasn't sufficient irrigation dispersal space, so we did look into it. Now, when I was talking about having very small spaces to, so we're using less materials, that's a bit of a blessing and a curse. Here you can see the edge of a window, like a roof window that's over my shower. You'll see the photo of that later on. That's the frame that holds our evacuated tube hot water system right at the edge there, where the tubes literally stop about that far from the window, and then the top of it is like about 50 mil behind the top of the parapet, so it just fit. I managed to work it out, and I was glad that I really should leave a little bit more contingency space for and tolerance for that, but thankfully that actually just fit in perfectly. That you can see is the position of the air conditioning units, the evaporative air conditioning units behind the parapets, perfectly hidden from the street. Now, also had to take photos of where we put things like the pipes going through to the tanks, so that when we're doing landscaping we wouldn't trash them. All in good in theory. I still managed to break one of them on New Year's Eve, and had to get a plumber out on New Year's Eve to come out and fix it, which is kind of a bit annoying. So yeah, anyway, that was in theory. That was the only one that broke, and it was me that did it, so I had no one else to blame but myself. Is that? Let's go back a second. And one other way of reducing the amount of energy you can put, sort of embodied energy in your house, is when the energy is being supplied to site, you can actually request them to put in green power. And that way you're not using coal or gas or whatever to the electricity used on site. I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it's still, I think every little bit counts. You've got to do what you can. And so effectively we've got two houses here, like the brother-in-law's sort of paying effectively an architect rate house. His was paying me fees, like as you'd sort of expect. It wasn't a completely commercial arrangement, but it was only fair. And because I was doing a lot of this in my own time initially, and but given you're going to that sort of level of trouble, you also want to be able to have your own levels of customization. So we struck a balance between me getting as many of the same fittings and materials identical so that the builder could see them effectively as two houses exactly the same and not two individual houses and price them accordingly. But then with a selection of variations in some of the finishes, which they could do to their own, to their heart's delight. So I'll just show you some of these things here. And I would say that we actually use concrete blocks, face blocks externally, because I had read that, or I'd been told by a lecturer at university that bricks have more embodied energy because apparently you've got to fire them. Even though concrete requires a lot of energy to mill and everything, firing bricks takes a lot of energy in kilns. And apparently each brick is the equivalent of, to fire each brick, it's the equivalent of driving, you can power a car for sort of 5 kilometres or something like that. So it's actually, when you think of how many hundreds or thousands of bricks, it quickly adds up. So I'll just show you some of the differences in finishes anyway. So that's on my side. It's on their side, so it's just slightly different colours, and we've got the same floors though. That's on our side. We got the dark polished concrete floor. The reasons that we talked about before. We're sounding cliche now. They went for the light one. That's, you can see the sort of light streaming in at the end of the day on in winter time. That's where it comes in really quite deep. We've got little slot windows over there as well, as you can see. But we've actually just behind that, there's actually that's where that little timber beam is over. And on our side, we've actually got a little blind that we can pull down there in summertime just to sort of prevent the heat load really hurting the glass too much. So en suite there. The bath that sort of overlooks the backyard. It's on my side, same thing again. You can sort of see the shower off to the left there, and how there's a light source coming at the top. That's what I look out every morning. I'm having a shower. It's kind of funny when you see it raining and you're getting rained on. It's kind of a bit odd, Yeah, it's nice. And yep, that's just sort of a view. And you can see we're really quite big on bringing the outside in and having a real strong visual connection to the outside. So we've got over here, this is there's going to be vines all growing over that eventually, and we'll sort of have that, there's a bit of an outdoor room. That's going to be a little green wall as well. And this is the little door I was talking about before, so we can actually sort of separate off the spaces if we want to, and because the kids are a bit noisy than what we kind of thought they would be when they were little. Live and learn. And we explain this, the decking material, I always want to tell people about this stuff. It's called modwood. It's made out of sawdust and recycled milk bottle plastics. And so it's entirely a waste product that you can use, and you never have to oil it. So it's the best deck. It looks just like a timber deck, but it's, again, maintenance free. It costs a little bit more than timber, but man, I'll do anything not to have to paint decks. So, and there's a lot of embodied energy in the paint and oils as well. So. Some view. We've got the little thermal chimney up the top here with those windows we can open up and let all the hot air rise out, and we can sort of open up, just as it naturally will. We open up windows to the south side of the house in the evenings, and it can sort of just draw the cool air in at night time, naturally purge. And with the high volume evaporative air conditioner, we can also just pump the air out first thing, when we get home on hot days or anything like that. It's cool very quickly. As it is, even during that absolute stinker of a heat wave we had last summer, there are often days that it wasn't till about 3:30, 4 in the afternoon that would even feel like turning it on, because we're just getting away with either ceiling fans or just sort of closing up and having blinds down and all these sorts of things. So that's all partly to do with just the passive element. The reverse brick veneer also helps. Helps keep the place cooler by absorbing some of the sort of the latent heat during the day, and then letting it out can get purged afterwards. And extremely high levels of insulation, again, very, quite similar to what Terry was talking about. That's our little outdoor court space. Recycled brick from the Little Red Brick Company. Actually, they were the same company that did the demolition of the old house, so I sort of felt like there's a little bit of the ghost of the old house in there, just asbestos free. My Monopoly house look again. See that little window trim, and you can actually see a little bit of the vine just behind that as well, so the vine will sort of help cover that again for summertime. And we don't quite have enough room to go permaculture, but you can sort of see that we've got quite a big veggie patch there, and tons of fruit trees. That's a banana tree that hasn't yet given us a single banana, but give it time. But we've got like between both sides of us, we've got sort of about 12 different fruit trees and when we were living in the old awful house there before, we used to exchange things with the neighbours on either side, where the neighbour on that side was giving us home brews and oranges and lemons, and we were giving them lemons, different varieties, and then on that side she'd bake us biscuits and stuff, and we'd give her some of our zucchinis when we had these. What is it about zucchinis? I don't know. When we always end up with millions of them all at once. Anyway, so that was kind of good, and we now do that with our with the brother-in-law, his partner. So that's it in effect. I didn't really go into a lot of the sort of designy details, I guess, and a lot of things, but it was more about the process. So I'll be more than happy to answer sort of more specific questions and things to do with ratings and energy use. And I will say that our house, even though I've got my little home office there, what I've been working, pretty much all the time, even with that, they're using equivalent about 2 kilowatt hours a day. During summer, our whole house use is only about between just less than 6 in summer to about sort of 8.5 in winter time, which is about 1/3 of the equivalent similar sized house in the area. So, and then obviously that's before we even pump back the double the amount of generated energy back to the grid. So, thank you very much.